As we welcome in TSN Hockey Insider, one half of the Ray and Dregs Hockey Podcast, and wish a Merry Christmas, Happy New Year to Mr. Darren Dreger. How you doing?
I'm doing okay. You know, I don't know if you can see my chair. Can you see my chair? It's like antique
look at that
pattern. Yeah, like all kidding aside. So my wife Holly used to work at a local funeral home. And not to take this into a morbid direction, but her boss was throwing out this antique chair, office chair, and Holly said, "Hey, it's a pretty nice chair. Do you want this chair?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure, bring it home." So I've been using this chair for the last couple of years, but you guys can probably hear it, right?
Yeah, a little creaky. Little creaky.
Yeah, so the powers that be, the brass at TSN, the IT guys are like, "You got to get a different chair." So my holidays were good, but I did not get what I asked for, which was a new office chair. No.
I thought you were going to say you were asking for like the matching leopard print.
No, that's for a different pile I do, yeah.
So to recap, Darren Dreger joining us from the jungle room, and he's been naughty this year. Santa did not gift him a new chair. It's been an extraordinary couple of weeks in Canucks land, Dreg, since we last talked to you. And, one of the things that we've kicked around here is ultimately, does Elias Pettersson or JT Miller have to go? You've done some digging around on the Miller side of that equation. What can you tell us?
Well, look, I'm certainly not in a position to answer the question, does either one of those star players, have to go? What I know is, and this is based on intel and sourcing from around the league, that, there's been a lot more chatter, certainly around JT Miller. And I don't think anyone would be surprised by that because, his name always seems to find that rumor mill. And, based on what went down recently, where you had Rick Tocchet come out, you had Quinn Hughes speak on this, you had Patrick Galvin talk about what was once an alleged rift between those two guys. Now the allegations have been removed, right? I mean, you don't have to like your coworker. I can appreciate that. And maybe it's much ado about very little, but I think that did fuel the speculation, fuel the fire among clubs around the National Hockey League who admit that the chatter specific to JT Miller has increased. And as far as Pettersson is concerned, I'm sure that Patrick Galvin gets calls and has had conversations in the past. I mean, when you look at the talent level of Elias Pettersson, there wouldn't be many teams that wouldn't have an interest in that, despite the fact that for whatever reason, he just seems to find ways to get in his own way. But I want to remind people that teams have conversations, managers have conversations about basically every player. We know on every team there are untouchables. But in this case, even though those are two top-end talents, and in one case, you've got the full protection on JT Miller, right? I mean, it's the no-move clause, which, by the way, he has not been asked to consider waiving. He has not. But that doesn't prevent teams from calling and having that level of conversation and just an acknowledgement to Patrick Galvin. Look, if you're ever getting to that place where you're looking to move JT, here's what we'd be interested in doing because we like that player. I do think that those conversations have been had, and I think that they've increased of late. But that doesn't mean that JT Miller is imminently getting moved.
If I can draw a line to a potential landing spot, Dregs, we know Chris Drury and the New York Rangers made a play for JT Miller a couple of years ago. Of course, he's an original Rangers draft pick. The Rangers with the worst record in the NHL outside of Buffalo and Chicago over the last 2 months. And our old friend Larry Brooks with a column yesterday. They have quit on their coach. They have quit on the organization. They have quit on themselves. And they have quit on the fans paying top dollar at the Garden.
Well, okay, so let's start with Larry's column. And look, he is an award-winning, long-standing journalist who has been at the top of his craft for many, many, many years. And he has poison in his pen from time to time. We know this, right? I mean, he can craft a column unlike any others. I don't recall the last time I saw or read something more eviscerating of a talent pool than this one. But Larry obviously has had enough of it. He's got a front row seat to it. And his sources within that organization are impeccable. But that's why, again, from an outside perspective, I think it was so damning, right? Because, he took the players to task. And I feel like that's probably an extension of maybe what ownership feels or other high-level sources within that organization. And the reason I phrase it that way is I'm reminded, I was there in Florida when Mike Landauer of the Ottawa Senators came out, and he was almost vibrating after the conversation he had with our colleague Pierre LeBrun. Passionate, and chose his words specifically in targeting, which was the word that Larry used in a tweet, that club for allegations of soft tampering around Brady Tkachuk, right? Well, I mean, obviously, ownership in Ottawa felt like Larry's sourcing was coming from the New York Rangers in some way, shape, or form. So now fast forward to where we're at here, and it's going to be interesting for Larry moving forward. I mean, Pat, you guys have been in a lot of dressing rooms over the years. When you fire an absolute bomb like that one, and Larry will be in that room, no question about it. He's going to be front and center. I was swapping text messages with another general manager, and you guys remember the old Dan Boyle situation where he tried to get Larry thrown out of the room way back in the day. So anything and everything is possible, but the full takeaway in a long-winded way is if Brooks is saying this about how he feels the players are playing for or not playing for Peter Laviolette, then Peter Laviolette has a problem. And it seems like Peter's days on the bench of the New York Rangers, according to that column, are numbered.
So you think it'd be a coaching change before a major trade on Broadway?
No, not necessarily.
Okay.
I mean, look, as far as Chris Drury is concerned, it's pretty evident based on what he's already done and the approach that he's taken, right? In taking down his captain, Jacob Trouba, in throwing it out there that Chris Kreider is available, in trading Capo Caco and the trade speculation around there. Chris Drury is not afraid to get his hands dirty. If there's a trade fit that works with the Vancouver Canucks, but look at it from Patrick Allvin's position here. I can appreciate why if we want to link Vancouver and New York, why the Rangers would have interest in Miller. Because, like we've talked about many times in the show, he drags you into the fight when he's on top of his game. And it does seem like that's a little bit, if not a lot, of what the New York Rangers need. And they know his history. But if I'm Allvin, you want one of my best players? Okay, I want one of your best players. Which guy is that? Huh? Is it Adam Fox? Who is it? Like, go down the list. Which guy is it? And maybe that's the reason. So just to wrap up, I think, for sure, a major trade with the Rangers is possible. It's plausible. But based on what I read from Larry Brooks, I could also see a coaching change, and that might be unfair to Peter Laviolette.
Dregs, one of the things you just said there was with JT Miller when he's at the top of his game, and he hasn't been there at all this season, and certainly since coming back from the personal leave, he still just hasn't looked anything close to the game breaker, this fire-breathing power forward. Now, Elias Pettersson out of the lineup, Quinn Hughes out of the lineup. This seems like a real opportunity for JT Miller to sort of announce his arrival to anybody in the National Hockey League, but first and foremost here in Vancouver. As we switch gears a little bit, the news yesterday that Hughes is week to week, which is absolutely a crippling blow for the Vancouver Canucks. And, just derailing. Hopefully it doesn't derail, but a gut punch to one of the great individual seasons that we have seen from a Canuck player out here with all the things that Quinn's done. Elias Pettersson's going to be back in a week. They can probably survive that. But what, if anything, are you hearing about the nature of and the length of either of these injuries?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, as they stated, it does sound like Pettersson is more day-to-day. Now, whether that, stretches into a longer period, who knows? I mean, what we've learned about the game of Elias Pettersson, he's got to get stronger, right? He's physically got to get stronger, and his level of compete and strength has to match what he has in skill. And when that happens, you're going to get an all-world type of player, but that's on him. Quinn Hughes, devastating. I checked in on it yesterday, and the messaging I got is that it should be, 3 weeks or less. That was the sense that I got. So that's week to week. If you get into the second week and now you're pushing 14 days, again, what you have to understand, and you guys do, but anyone listening is it's not in the best interest of the Vancouver Canucks or Quinn Hughes to push whatever he's dealing with, right? So if it takes 3 weeks to get him healthy, I don't think that the alarm bells should be ringing unless this team, to steal that old Brian Burke clause, drives the 18-wheeler over the cliff. And I don't think that that's going to happen if, J-Pat, to start where you started or to end where you started, JT Miller, grabs everybody by the bootstraps and let's get at it. There's opportunity for him, opportunity for every player in that lineup to get something done. And in the meantime, you've got Patrick Allvin and Jamie Rutherford doing what they do. And that's working the phones and looking for the pieces that are going to make this team better. But they're not going to do that. There's no sense of urgency or desperation because two key guys are not going to be available for a stretch here.
So you don't think this ups the ante in any way with, like, Hronek was already out and it's going to be for another month, even though he's back skating, and now Hughes for 3. Like, we've known that the Canucks have been in search of a defenseman even when they're healthy. They need help. So you don't think that this development expedites the search in any way?
Well, no, and the only way it would is if the Vancouver Canucks are willing to cave on a player that they don't want to be part of it. And who is that player? It doesn't necessarily have to be a roster player. It could be a top prospect. It could be a collection of things, right? Financially, depending on who you're working with, you've got to make the money work. That's obvious just to comply. But, we've talked about the Rangers, and there's been much speculation in the last month plus around the Buffalo Sabres. Well, every time I check in with Kevin Adams, I'm reminded, now they've won a few games here, but he's reminding that, look, I'll move one of my top guys. I just need that top guy coming back the other way. And my definition of the other team's top guy isn't the same as theirs. So unless those two worlds come back together and one general manager changes, then I don't feel the sense of urgency. But all that can change with a simple phone call.
So, to your knowledge, the Canucks were not close to anything by the holiday roster freeze, Dregs?
Yeah, we might be dealing in semantics here, Matt, right? Do I think that management of the Vancouver Canucks was pushing right up to the buzzer of the freeze? Sure, of course. And not Vancouver related, but, I had a conversation with someone deeply involved with the Montreal Canadiens, like maybe 12 hours before the freeze. And the messaging I got back was, hey, yeah, we've got some lines in the water here, but unless something changes, then now we're probably going to be quiet. And then kaboom, the Carrier deal happens with the Nashville Predators, and Barron goes the other way, and you're like, geez. Well, that came together pretty quickly. So that might have been a scenario where Vancouver was involved with another club, not Montreal. But let's go back to Jimmy Rutherford's availability with After Hours, right, with Ray Ferraro and Scott Oak, where he talked about how he felt like they were two pieces away from being a contending team. We knew one of them was a top 4 defenseman, and the other piece, as it turns out, is a better forward. Okay, well, nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. Maybe a little bit, just to revisit J-Pat's comment on a heightened level of urgency. Maybe that, because, now you're looking at Quinn Hughes out for week to week. Maybe that does put a little bit more pressure on trying to get that defenseman. But I'll repeat myself in saying that, unless there's more of a willingness from Vancouver's perspective to give up a better player or better assets, then I don't think they were that close or are close as we're having this conversation right now.
Speaking of roster freeze, Dregs, that was quite a fair bit of activity there. Mm-hmm. Are we looking at a new sort of mini trade deadline in December going forward?
Geez, I hope not, because I can tell you that we count the minutes until that freeze hits. No, all kidding aside, it's one of the times of the year where you can feel that there's a higher level of attention, right? And we use kind of catchphrases like there's a buzz around the NHL, there's trade chatter that's happening and all of that. But most definitely this year, there seemed to be more of it around the freeze and then coming out of the freeze on the 27th. So it's definitely a deadline. And I was going to say soft deadline. That's not right. It's a deadline that every general manager all clubs pay close attention to, because at that point you're feeling good or you're feeling terrible about where you're situated in the standings. But you're also recognizing that, look, this is a reset for our club. If we're sagging, let's hope that the players get a couple of days break and then they come back ready to go for a push that we're going to need to have, to conclude the first half of the regular season and get us going in the second half. So it matters to the clubs for sure.
It's kind of funny. I was thinking, and obviously the groundwork they do before the freeze can come to fruition after the freeze lifts. So, we may still see some movement here with talks that had happened prior to Christmas. But I also, like all the chatter around the draft, and then quite often you'll see a few days after the draft, teams will go back to their home bases, and then you see some trades happen ahead of free agency. So maybe some of that. What about Four Nations this year? Do you think that is going to impact the trade deadline in any way? And I ask that because it's an unnatural break in the schedule that we're not used to. And I wonder if some teams get to February 8th and recognize that they're going to be sellers at that point as opposed to a month later when the deadline actually hits.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I do think that there's something to it. Jimmy and now Billy Guerin with the Minnesota Wild. I mean, they've always embraced the sensitivity, but the reasoning behind why you get in that trade pool early, right? And a lot of times it's player friendly, but then as a team, you also, accept the dividends that can be paid out by doing that, because your player settles, his family settles, his comfort level grows, and you hope that helps you deep into the season and into the playoffs. And I think we could see more of that. I do. I think there's pressure on the players. Like, we're already talking about some of the injured guys who are named to the Four Nations rosters and whether or not they should be available or will they be available. So if we're already talking that several weeks outside of Four Nations, then I would think that most pro scouting departments and general manager offices are looking at it similarly, saying, well, based on the break, it wouldn't be a bad idea for us to try and get into that world a little bit earlier than we would normally.
Yeah, and I've always thought it wise to get in early for many of the reasons you outlined, Dregs. Marvelous stuff, sir. Hope that new chair comes for New Year's. Have a happy one, and we'll catch up next week, Darren.
Thanks, Dreger.
All right. Happy New Year, guys.